Again, welcome everyone to my Jewish Learning and our monthly tour. We are so thrilled to welcome Yona Abbedour El-Fassi, who was born in Morocco and is currently based in Israel. Yona is a researcher examining identity formation among second and third generation Jewish Moroccan immigrants in France and Israel. As a documentary filmmaker, his films explore Moroccan and Sephardic Jewry and highlight the dynamics of Muslim-Jewish relations. So thank you so much for being with us today, and I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Julie. Thank you, Danny Rothstein, for the invitation, and I'm so glad to be with all of you today. It's wonderful to see so many people from different places. How exciting. I'll share with you my screen. Just a moment. So, as Julie said, and as you know, today we'll have a tour, a virtual tour to Morocco, and more specifically, we'll cover the 2 millennia story of Moroccan Jewry. And so let's dig right into it. First of all, we'll start with some important events that have led to the arrival, integration, and assimilation of, and departure eventually of Moroccan Jews, from North Africa in general and in Morocco in particular. These are so many dates, don't get overwhelmed. We'll cover each, we'll look at each date in details. So first of all, the question is, how did Jews arrive to North Africa? This immigration dates back to the destruction of the first temple in Jerusalem in the year 587 BCE. The next great period of Jewish migration to the Maghreb area came after the fall of Jerusalem in the year 70 CE. With the dispersion of the Jews, they landed in almost the four corners of the world, all the way to North Africa. And this is a map of, North Africa, all the way to Morocco. Now, when Jews arrived to North Africa, there were tribes of the Amazigh people, who are commonly known as the Berbers. And Berbers is actually the terminology that was given by the Romans, and so it's preferable, it's more politically correct to say Amazigh, which means in the indigenous language, in the Amazigh language, it means free men and women. And so that's how the Amazigh people self-identify. But nevertheless, Berbers is still used, and even Amazigh people will still, sometimes still talk about themselves as Berbers, it's mostly the activists, but also it is becoming like now in the conscious of people it's more correct, as I said, more politically correct to use the Amazigh word. So the Amazigh people are the early inhabitants of North Africa. And, excuse me, so we can trace the presence of Jews in the region of North Africa back to the 2nd century, when some archaeologists found Hebrew grave markers and the ruins of a synagogue in Volubilis, Walili, which was once bustling Roman city in northern Morocco that neighbors actually Meknes. So you can see to the left-hand side of the screen, you can see this menorah that was found in this site, in this archaeological site, and the Hebrew tombstone. Both of these you can actually find today in the Archaeological Museum, National Archaeological Museum in Rabat, in the capital of Morocco. And this is how the site looked a few years ago, but it's still quite the same today. That you can visit as well, as I said, in northern Morocco. So the Amazigh populations of North Africa were generally polytheists before the arrival of any monotheist religion. And actually, once Jews came to the region, Judaism gained a lot of converts among the Amazigh tribes. Sometimes a whole tribe would convert. Between brackets, I would like to mention that polytheist influences still exist on both Judaism and Islam in Morocco until today. So these Jews and their offspring will become later to be known as Toshavim, which is a Hebrew word that means the indigenous people or the natives. In other words, Jews have been in this region, in the Maghreb area. Maghreb is North Africa, since antiquity, together with the Amazigh population before the coming of Arabs and Islam. Now, do we really know if these are Berber Jews, for example? So this is like if you write online Berber Jews, Amazigh Jews, you will get images like these. And I collected these actually from the archive of the Alliance Israélite Universelle, an organization based in Paris that we'll talk about later. And these are some famous postcards that showed up as I was researching on Google Image. Now the question is, do we really know if they are Amazigh Jewish, if they are Berber Jews? Not really. We can only speculate from their costumes, clothing, and jewelry. We can also tell from the town or village they come from in Morocco, and sometimes from the family name. There are actually some Moroccan Jewish family names that their meaning or their etymology comes from the Berber structure, from the Berber language. And note here that I'll be using Berber and Amazigh interchangeably, so I apologize if it is confusing, but they basically mean the same. Now, so I'll give some examples actually of these Moroccan Jewish family names. Names like Ohana or Waknin, most names that start with O. O in Amazigh language means the son of. So Ohana means the son of Hana. Waknin, son of Knin, right? And these how like the names were structured back then. Great. So until now, I talked about the early inhabitants, right? The Jews who settled together in North Africa together with the Amazigh, already established Amazigh tribes in North Africa. Now, with the coming of the Arabs in the 8th century, both Jews and the Amazigh people will face a challenge. The challenge was an attempt of Arabization and therefore Islamization. They succeeded in converting a huge number of Jews and Amazighs to Islam. And here in the painting, you see in the background the Gibraltar, the Rock of Gibraltar, and here an army that is, Tariq ibn Ziyad. Tariq ibn Ziyad was a Berber warrior who led the conquest of Al-Andalus, of Andalusia, in 711. So Tariq ibn Ziyad, actually after him, the Gibraltar comes from Arabic, Jabal Tariq, the mountain of Tariq, basically. So this is why it is called Gibraltar. So Tariq ibn Ziyad, who was among the Amazigh converts to Islam, he led a troop of about 7,000 Amazigh men, and they invaded Visigothic Hispania in 711, as I mentioned. And so we know then later Arab culture and Muslim culture will flourish in Al-Andalus together with the Christian and the Jewish Andalusians, sorry. Now, with the arrival of Islam to North Africa, new status will be imposed on non-Muslims, and here we're talking mainly about Jews and Christians. Jews and Christians who live under a Muslim majority have a specific status called dhimmis. Dhimmis means the people of the book who live, so the people of the book, according to Islam, are Jews and Christians who live under a Muslim majority. They had to pay jizya, which is which was jizya as a kind of a poll tax in order to earn the Sultan's protection. What happened is sometimes the jizya, this tax, was very high, that depending on who ruled, which dynasty and which monarch, and it was sometimes used as a strategic move in order to force Jews to convert, meaning if they're not able to pay the jizya, however high it is, they will have to convert or exiled, basically. However, as dhimmis, and here I'll share with you a quote from Chaim Zafrani, who is a Moroccan Jewish historian and a scholar on the topic, who perceived in this status the following. So I'll read the quote. The Jews of the Maghreb, like all those of Dar al-Islam, land of Islam, knew the condition of dhimmi imposed by the dominant religion, which is Islam. A condition that is certainly degrading and often precarious, but legal status, after all, liberal. Very high degree of judicial, administrative, and cultural autonomy, compared to that arbitrary that the Jews of Christendom knew in Ashkenazi country. So here we see that this Moroccan Jewish scholar is rather, he rather cherishes this status that the Jews had in Morocco and throughout the Muslim land of Islam. So we see that he has like a rather, and this is kind of controversial among historians, whether this status was good for the Jews or was it bad? Because let's also remember that this status, which calls for the protection of the minorities, the Jewish minority and the Christian minority, it still came with some limitations. Some limitations that were sometimes dehumanizing towards, like, you know, of the people who were under that status. Right. When the fanatic dynasty of Almohad conquered Cordoba in 1148, they abolished this dhimmi, the status of dhimmi, which means that the non-Muslim communities had to choose between conversion to Islam, death, or exile. Why do I show you the picture of Rambam, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimun, who was born in 1138 in Cordoba and then moved to the city of Fez and then ended up in Egypt, but today he's buried in Tveria, in Tiberia, because he lived under this dynasty of Almohads. And so many Jews accepted Islam, as I said, because they had to choose between they had three options, or conversion to Islam, death, or exile. And so indeed, many Jews accepted Islam, or at least pretended to accept Islam, what is called taqiyya in Arabic, meaning, you know, for their safety. And this did not change their inner beliefs. So Jews at that time were living a duality of religious identities, an external one pretending to be Muslims, and an internal one which is strongly attached to Judaism. Maimonides' family, so together with his father, Maimonides, they opted for exile. They fled to Fez, which was known for its reputation as spiritual and intellectual center. And this in itself is not unproblematic, because Fez itself came under the rule of Almohads in 1145, basically 3 years before, you know, they conquered Cordoba. And here some scholars maintain, and historians maintain, that Rambam, Maimonides, like his co-religionists, might have adopted taqiyya, i.e. adopting Islam publicly at least. I know this might come as a shock to many of you, but here are some, well, I don't know if it's proof, but some examples of that maintain, that actually consolidate what some historians believe. So on the right-hand side, we see a picture of Al-Qarawiyyin University and Mosque, Al-Qarawiyyin University, which is at the heart of the old city of Fez. And this university was actually exclusive for Muslims. Only Muslims who could learn and teach there. And we know that Rambam, Maimonides, when he moved to Fez, he Arabized his name from Moshe ben Maimun to Musa ibn Maimun. And here, this photo actually is, this plaque is actually found in the street where he supposedly lived in the old Medina of Fez, in the old city of Fez. And in Arabic, his name is written in, you know, its Arabic version, which is Musa ibn Maimun. Basically what's written here, Dar Musa bin Maimun, the house of Musa bin Maimun, which was found right here. So this is the street where Maimonides reportedly lived in Fez, with the photo on the left-hand side. So basically what I'm trying to say is that he lived in the heart of the Medina together with Muslims. So a quarter that was exclusively for Muslims, because the Jews, they lived in another area called Funduk Lihudi. And so that is one. And two, the fact that he could study and eventually also teach at Al-Qarawiyyin, at the prestigious University of Al-Qarawiyyin, could also explain the fact that he might have adopted Islam, at least outwardly. Then we know that he moved to Egypt, where he was the doctor of Salah ad-Din, but I believe that this in itself is good material for a 2-hour talk. But I'm going to now fast forward to 1438. And I hope that you're still with me and I'm making this as clear as possible. Now, these are two pictures of the Mellah. Mellah is the Jewish quarter, is the name of the Jewish quarter in Morocco. So in your next visit, almost each city in Morocco has its own Mellah, its own Jewish quarter. And so I am certain in your next, if you've been to Morocco, you've visited one, or in your next visit to Morocco, I advise you to visit some Mellahs, because that was the dwelling of the Jewish communities. So starting from 1438, Jews had to move from the Muslim Jewish integrated city of Fez. So I told you that before the 15th century, Jews lived in the old city in a separate neighborhood called Funduk Lihudi, not together with the Muslims, but it was in the old city of Fez, right? But now, starting from 1438, they had to move to the newly established Jewish quarter of the city. Jewish quarters in Morocco came to be known as Mellah because the first one was established in Fez, and this area right here was a place of, today is known as Place du Commerce, place of commerce, but in the 15th century, it was a bustling area of where the Jews dealt with salt. They were bringing salt from nearby mountains. And so that was an exclusive Jewish profession. And also we know that salt back then in 15th, 16th, and even 17th centuries was like gold, basically, because it was used in order to preserve foods and for all different purposes. Now, Jews moving to, this is how the Mellah looks like today. This is right here, the gate of the Mellah, and this is the royal palace. So note that, you know, the Mellah is built right next to the royal palace because we're still in this logic of, you know, Jews as dhimmis, as subordinate basically to the protection of the Sultan and the kings. And so it was the king like building this quarter that was within reach. He could also first like collect, you know, the taxes that I talked about earlier, the yearly taxes that the Jews had to pay, and in order also to protect them if necessary. So here's another photo of the Mellah of Marrakesh, for example. Other cities also adopted the same model, and new quarters were built all over Morocco. In most cities, because there are a few cities in Morocco that did not have a Mellah, like that is the case of Tangier, meaning like even until today, Jews and Muslims live together in mixed areas. But in most cities such as Fez, Marrakesh, Salé, Rabat, Agadir, I think also had Mellah. Most cities in Morocco had a Mellah where Jews were able to worship freely, where there were all the necessary religious, educational institutions, kosher food, kosher restaurants, everything was within the walls of the Mellah. But the thing that was not taken into consideration is the demographic increase, like of, you know, building a Mellah in 15th century and having the same walled quarter, the same space later in the 20th century meant like also Jews having to live in some because of the demographic growth. So they had to live, like whole family lived in one room because they were not able to build outside of the walls of the Mellah. And so it was crowded. It was at sometimes, like for example, Charles de Foucault, when he visited Morocco in the early 20th century, he described the Mellah as being a place of not very high hygiene, filthy, of poverty, etc. So that was kind of also the situation of the Mellah during certain epochs. So until now, I talked about the first group that we identify in Morocco as the Toshavim, the first group of Jews who have been in Morocco since antiquity for more than 2,000 years. And now we will talk about Sephardic Jews, because not all Moroccan Jews are Sephardic. There were Jews before the arrival of the Sephardic Jews. And when I say Sephardic, I mean Jews who were expelled from the Iberian Peninsula. Now, under the reign of the Catholic monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, there were various expulsions of Jews and Muslims from Spain. But 1492 remains a marking date for Sephardic Jews and Muslims. Both were obliged to convert to Catholicism or leave their realms. Those who had well-going commerce or properties were baptized in order to keep their fortune while keeping their Jewish identity hidden. So kind of the same mechanism that I talked about earlier with the Almohads dynasty under Muslim rule. Others refused and had to leave. And Morocco was a chosen destination by a large number of Jews and Muslims fleeing Spain because of proximity. These Jews will be known as the Megorashim, in Hebrew meaning the expelled ones, the expelled Jews. But also like these are the Sephardic Jews who will join the already established Jewish community in Morocco. So these Megorashim, or maybe their community leaders who became the new settlers in Morocco, perceived the Toshavim, the already existing Jewish community in the country, as barbaric Jews, as barbarians. And it is very interesting because even until recently, until 1947, I believe, there were two legislations, one Mosaic, so of the Toshavim, of the native Jews of Morocco, and one Sephardic, that you can even like mentioned in Ketubot, like what is the lineage of the family? Are they Sephardic or Mosaic? And this actually also we will see how it will affect the communities within, like that they did not interact in the beginning. Like each community had its own rabbis, they had their own shochet, their own like slaughtering rites. So like they had their own rabbis, their own rites, their own traditions. And even sometimes they built their own synagogues and lived almost in separate areas. This beautiful synagogue we're looking at is Beit HaKnesset L'Azama, the synagogue L'Azama, that is found in Marrakesh, in the Mellah, in the Jewish quarter of Marrakesh. And note the date when it was founded in 1492, which basically matches, the date of expulsion. Also, something I'd like you to look at is, the architecture, the colors, the courtyard, basically everything, like kind of Sepharad reimagined, Cordoba reimagined, Sevilla reimagined, meaning, the colors that were familiar to them, the courtyard, the orange tree, the patio, everything kind of is, could be copy paste, from what was known to them, from what was home and familiar to them, they brought to the Red City. And Marrakesh is so not blue. Actually, Marrakesh is known as the Red City because it's hot, it is sandy, it's, all the walls are kind of red because of the material that they're built in, also to protect from the heat. But you enter this synagogue and you're like in Cordoba or Sevilla, different colors and different vibe to it. So this was also, so basically L'Azama in Arabic or Judeo-Arabic, meaning like the Megorashim, the expelled Jews basically who built this synagogue. And actually it functions until today. And it's a really beautiful synagogue, and it was a yeshiva. And today it is a museum that, that is open for everyone to visit. More synagogues from the beautiful city of Fez, my bird city. Both synagogues are from the 17th century, were established in the 17th century and were recently renovated. On the left-hand side is Ben Danan Synagogue, which was the synagogue where the Sephardic rite was observed, where the Sephardic tradition. And Slat al-Fasiyin was the synagogue of Jews, of the native Jews, of Toshavim, or in Arabic we say al-Bildiyin, meaning basically the natives, the original Jews. And it is very interesting to see how they're similar, but basically they there was like they use different, for example, different siddur, like different prayer books, different chanting, different melodies as well, different, sometimes, you know, also in the halakha, like they would like read in the Torah, who can, on which days, etc. So some minor also different differences. And these both synagogues are also today open for visitors. Unfortunately, no Jew lives in the Mellah today, at least in the Mellah of Fez, in the Jewish quarter of Fez. All Jews moved to the new city, and we'll see eventually why. So they are not used anymore for prayers, these two beautiful synagogues, because, as I said, nobody lives in walking distance to these synagogues. Only they're used for some main events. When, for example, Prince Charles came to visit in 2014, he went to visit the Ben Danan synagogue, and the whole Jewish community was there to receive him. In 1862, the Paris-based organization that I mentioned earlier, that I used their archive to take some postcards, the ones that we're looking at now. So this organization, Alliance Israélite Universelle, and I'm trying it with an English accent, the Alliance Israélite Universelle, they opened their first school in Tétouan in northern Morocco. So they were established actually in 1960 in Paris. 2 years later, they built their first school in Tétouan in northern Morocco, and later spread to other cities and towns throughout the country. These schools in the main cities, so almost not only main cities, actually in also towns and villages, they played a key role in providing French and modern education to Jewish communities. And this in itself constitutes a very critical chapter in the history of Moroccan Jewry, because that was like opening up to the modern world, to modern education through French, through the French culture. It will take a while, will take time for the families to accept to send their kids, you know, instead of going to the cheder, instead of going to religious traditional school, it took them time to send their children to these modern schools. What happened is, another element is that coming in close contact with the French civilizing mission. So we're talking like in the 1862, you know, France is expanding its power and colonial powers in Africa mainly. And so these schools, they had hand in hand the civilizing mission that we will save those poor Jews, we'll save them, we'll provide them with education, and which was the case. So this educational institution imposed French. Now, these children, they spoke Arabic at home, which was the mother tongue of most Moroccan Jewry. They spoke a kind of Judeo-Moroccan Arabic, especially in the center of Morocco. In the north, they spoke mainly Spanish or Hakatiya. But French became, it will gain more grounds because it had this like also attachment to the culture, to the French culture, to the French behavior, kind of. I'll give you an example. So within the walls of these schools, inside these schools, you were not supposed to say a word in Arabic. You could only speak in French, to the point that if a teacher hits you like that, and you say ah, you'll take another one. You'll need to say ay. So to that point, which eventually created also some it resulted in kind of a national and emotional attachment to France, and hence also conflicting relationships within the families, because the parents and grandparents did not speak French, and now the children and grandchildren want to speak only French, and you know, to scale up basically in the society. And so that created some conflicting relations within families, where sometimes the children or grandchildren will be ashamed of their families who did not speak French. And another example of how these schools penetrated kind of the psyche of Moroccan Jews was also through changing their names. So from Arabic sounding names like Masoud, Aisha, Habiba, Sulika, the names will be transformed to metamorphosed to Solange, Georgette, Simon, etc. So names that are more French sounding names, which also created. So I remember the French, because the French within colonialism in Morocco, there was divide and rule. And so this kind of policy even, it enlarged the gap between Jews and Muslims, because Jews that they had some kind of close relations with their neighbors, Muslim neighbors and friends, at least through names and language, now there is a kind of a wall that there will be more, the Jewish communities in Morocco, the Jewish community in Morocco, or some Jewish members of the Jewish community in Morocco will be more associated with the French than with Moroccans, with the natives, which was also kind of similar scenario in Algeria. But Morocco still is not under French colonialism. Only in 1912 that Morocco will become under the French protectorate. But until then, an elite of French-speaking and Westernized Jews was established. What happened? Remember how the Jewish quarter is right next to the royal palace, meaning that in 1912, when the French protectorate was signed under the rules of the Fez Treaty, it was signed right here in this palace. The Jews were blamed for bringing the colonialism to Morocco, for flirting with the French, because they were, as I said earlier, they were associated with the French, and so they were perceived as the enemy, that they were responsible for bringing, colonialism. And so the same day there was a pogrom in Fez, and a lot of Jews were killed in the Jewish quarter. Morocco, French protectorate lasted in Morocco from 1912 until 1956. And we will see how also independence of Morocco and some other major events will lead to the exodus of Moroccan Jews from Morocco. Well, I don't know if exodus is the right word, but at least because there was no expulsion, unlike other Arab countries and Muslim countries. But yeah, there were some, I will get to that in a moment. But before, and I enjoyed really entering the session with some nice music of Rabbi Chaim Luke that you see right here, and listen to Judeo-Arabic music. It was really wonderful. Because I want to also pose a moment before moving to the question of Jews leaving Morocco. I want to also acknowledge how Moroccan Judaism contributed to the Moroccan culture at large, and vice versa, and how the Moroccan culture contributed to the Moroccan Jewish traditions and practices. Because coming in close contact with other ethnicities, religious practices, and languages gave birth to new Judeo languages, such as, I mentioned it earlier, Hakatiya, which was spoken mainly in the north. Hakatiya is a kind of mixture of, for those who know Ladino, kind of mixture of, Judeo-Spanish and Arabic. Another language was Judeo-Berber or Judeo-Amazigh. And of course, what the majority of Moroccan Jews spoke was Judeo-Arabic. And talking about music, also different styles of music flourished and developed, such as Andalusian music, as we know it in Morocco, Ala, popular music known as Shgouri and Matrouz. Matrouz is kind of a, sorry about the noise. Matrouz is a kind of a combination of, this is actually a good example, Rabbi Chaim Luke singing with Abderrahim Soueri, and I will send some resources to Danny and Julie in the end, and they can pass them around, including some videos from YouTube that I'd like you to look at, where you will see, for example, Abderrahim Soueri, who is a Moroccan Muslim, singing together with Rabbi Chaim Luke, who is a Moroccan-born Jewish, well, he's Israeli, he moved to Israel. them singing together in a festival in Fez, the Festival of Sacred Music of Fez. Rabbi Chaim Luke will sing in Hebrew, Abderrahim Souire will sing in Arabic, but both to the same melody, to the same music, which is very powerful moment, especially in the crowd, where some recognize the Arabic and say they would sing along, some will recognize the piyutim that the rabbi will be singing and they will sing along, and coming together like to sing the chorus, and I think it's very meaningful. And I will also send you another video of another concert from Essaouira, a beautiful concert that I really invite you, if you can have your visit to Morocco coincide with that, with the festival of Atlantic Andalusian music in Essaouira. I will also send the proper name of the festival. And it happens usually around October, November. And in that concert, I think a few years ago, Sana Marahati, who is right here, performed together with Benjamin Bouzaghlou. Benjamin Bouzaghlou is a Moroccan Jew. Sana Marahati is a Moroccan Muslim. Sana Marahati will sing this time in Hebrew, and Benjamin Bouzaghlou will sing in Arabic. So basically, Morocco really cherishes, and Morocco wants to think of positions itself as the heir of the Spanish Golden Age. For the last 13 centuries, Jews in Morocco have lived most of the time in harmony with the Muslim majority. As I said, most of the time, that was not always the case. But Morocco does really work hard in order to promote this dialogue between Jews, Muslims, and Christians. Although there are no Christians officially in Morocco, but still they will be included in the French Christians who live in Morocco or other Christian groups. And Morocco really tries to, as I said, promote the dialogue and this idea of living together. I wanted also to talk about Mimouna, but I might skip that, and I will send you a website that elaborates on Mimouna, what is Mimouna, and this beautiful celebration that brings both Jews and Muslims after Pesach, the Jewish, the Jewish Passover. But I just want, maybe just very briefly, before I leave time for a Q&A, just briefly talk about, the departure of Moroccan Jews from Morocco. So if we talk about numbers, in the mid 20th century, there were about 300,000 Jews in Morocco. Today, there are about 2,000, even less, 2,000 Jews who live in Morocco, who opted to stay or came back to live in Morocco. So, and that, their departure or their exodus happened for various reasons. I'm gonna mention some, or at least the main ones. So the foundation of the State of Israel, the coming of Jews worldwide, the dream, this yearning for Zion and this dream coming true, caused result in the ingathering of Jews from all over the world into Israel. In Morocco, that was not necessarily the case. Not many people, not many Jews left in 1948. A few, but you will see the numbers are still very timid, not very, and this number includes both Tunisia and Algeria. But it created some, there were some, actually, with the declaration of the State of Israel becoming independent, sorry, the King Mohammed V, who was the king back then, he came out and gave a speech in order to, where he was calling for, calling the Moroccan population, the general Moroccan population, not to accuse Jews for anything, not to harm the Jewish community because they are Moroccan before anything else. Regardless, there were some attacks in Oujda, etc., where some Jews were killed because they were, again, held responsible for the creation of the Zionist state, as they call it, or the Zionist entity. 1956 is the independence of Morocco. Look at how the number will increase even a year before, because calling for independence and, that was also a moment of instability. And, especially with the National Party of Al-Istiklal, who also targeted the Jews. They wanted also the Jews to leave with the leaving of the French. 1961 is the death of Mohammed V, who was really known as being good to the Jews, even as a protector of the Jews. And he will pass away. His son Hassan II will be crowned king. And then, although Mohammed V was not in favor for Jews leaving Morocco, so he refused to grant them passports because he argued that they are Moroccan and they should not, fall to the lies or to the luring of the Jewish agency by pushing them to leave. Hassan II, on the other hand, he was in support of, he had an agreement with the U.S., with some American, with the U.S. and with some with the Jewish agency to let the Jews leave, and we'll see how will that affect the numbers. And note that these numbers are mainly from Jews who left for Israel, not including those who left for France or to other countries. Of course, the Six-Day War will also have an impact, and we're left today with about 200 Jews. I apologize, sorry. Well, basically, I just summarized everything right here. But I want to end with, let's say, a positive note. Recently, in the last decade or more, Morocco is adopting a new discourse, a new way of looking at Jews of Morocco. So even the departure of the Jews is no longer taboo. Because under the reign of Hassan II, it was a kind of a taboo to talk about it. But now, under the reign of Mohammed VI, there is, let's say, more freedom to tackle even some hard topics and some sensitive issues, and including, the departure of the Jews. Here, what you see, and that is what is manifested. That is what is also what inspired cultural productions, be it films, documentaries, magazines, music as well. What you see here in the middle is a film by Mohamed Ismail called Goodbye Mothers, Adieu Mère, and Fin Mashia Moshe, Where Are You Going Moshe by Hassan Benjeloun. Both of the films, they actually, that are fictional films, they tackled this theme of the departure of the Jews. Actually, they're really well done, and I think they're available online. Another brilliant film by a friend, Kamal Ashkar, a note that the three of them are Muslims. He made a wonderful documentary film called Tinrir Jerusalem, The Echoes of the Millah, where he follows the trajectory of some families from Tinrir, their birth city in southern Morocco, to Israel. And actually the three films were screened in Moroccan cinemas and also on national TV. And this one right here, Le Juif en nous, au cœur de l'identité marocaine, the Jew inside us, at the heart of the Moroccan identity. And you see how the Moroccan flag is kind of reconsidered with the Jewish, sorry, it's not Jewish, with the Magen David, with the Star of David, which is a Jewish symbol, but actually the Moroccan flag was prior to 1912, prior to the French protectorate, it had the six-pointed star. I think it's the Mazgan, it's the AC, sorry. It's hot in Israel. Thank God we have AC everywhere. But yeah, it also comes with a price. So you see how Morocco is actually accepting kind of, or is at ease, talking about this aspect, this component of the Moroccan identity that includes the Moroccan Jewish component. Even the Moroccan Constitution, the new Moroccan Constitution post-Arab Spring in 2011, comes to recognize this diversity that exists in Morocco. And here look that its unity, talking about Morocco, is forced by the conversions of its Arab Islamist, Amazigh, Saharan Hassani components, nourished and enriched by its African, Andalusian, and Hebraic and Mediterranean influences. Actually, this quote from the Constitution you will find in some Jewish institutions in Morocco, including the Jewish Museum in Casablanca, a beautiful museum that I invite you also to visit in your next visit to Morocco. the Moroccan Jewish history also integrated school and school manuals, which was a great move. And of course, recently Morocco signed an agreement or reestablished its relation with the State of Israel, diplomatic relations that were now officialized. And in Israel, right here in Tel Aviv, we have an embassy of Morocco. In Rabat, there is an embassy or bureau de liaison, like liaison office in Rabat. And there's there are a lot of agreements and a lot of projects that Morocco and Israel are involved in. And I will just finish with a quote from my rabbi. Sorry, I apologize. Where, usually we ask the question, why did the Jews leave Morocco, right? I think another pertinent question is also, why did the Jews stay in Morocco? Why did they opt for staying in Morocco? And I asked this question to my rabbi, why did you stay? Who actually still lives not only in Morocco, but in Fez, his birth city. For him, it is that important. Although he did his studies in Israel and in France, actually his family, all of his children live in France and Israel. Still, he wanted to stay in Fez with a, tiny Jewish community of about 20 people. That sometimes it's kind of sad. It's even hard to get a minyan. It's like 10 men in order to perform prayers. But still, there's a small Jewish community there. And so asking him why did he opt to stay in Morocco, he answered me, with his wisdom as a rabbi, with the following quote. This is what he said. With all the important dayanim, judges that I have told you about earlier, next to him, talking about his Rabbi Yedidia Monsenego, who was the Grand Rabbi of Fez, next to him, no one could move. He was charif, he was sharp. Everyone was afraid of him, meaning that he was respected. Rabbi Meir Israel, another important rabbi, also did not want to go to Israel. Him and Rabbi Yedidia promised each other, it is only after their death that their children left. What they wanted to say is that our ancestors are buried here, so why not us? They told me, my son, the important is the soul. It is the soul that goes up to the sky. God judges the soul. The body is buried under the ground. That was their wisdom. Thank you so much for listening to me. And I'll be happy now to hear you. I'm sorry about all the coughing.
This was wonderful. Thank you so much, Yona. We do have a few questions. I'll just ask that if folks do have questions, we're going to take them from the chat box, and you can put them in the chat box now. Donnie is going to assist and watch for questions, so you can hop in after we do a few of these that have already come in during the presentation. So forgive me if you did address some of these, because I may have missed it. A couple of people were asking about World War II and what the French protectorate did or what Morocco did at that point. Protect or persecute its Jews, or somewhere in between?
Wow, great question. Thank you. I touched upon it, like I really briefly, I mentioned it kind of, I alluded to it when saying that Mohammed V protected the Jews of Morocco, because during the Second World War, Morocco is under French protectorate, and the Vichy government that also came, they collaborated with the Nazis. They had also power over the Sultan, over Mohammed V. Now, they asked for a list of all Moroccan Jews to be delivered to the Nazis, and reportedly, Mohammed V had a meeting with some of the Vichy government representatives, French leaders, and he refused to hand any names or whatsoever. And he said, if you want names, you start with me first and all the Muslims, and then you can reach the Jews, which was a powerful statement, a powerful speech that marked the memory of Moroccan Jews. That the narrative today is we were saved by the King Mohammed V, he was good to the Jews, and he was even actually the some Moroccan Jewish diplomats such as André Azoulay and Serge Berdugo, and also the international Moroccan Jewish community, they pushed for his name to be considered by Yad Vashem as righteous among the nations. But still, the file is still open, because one of the criteria in order to be granted that status is that you have to risk your life, and that is, as a king, like how did he really risk his life in order to make such move? Of course, they argue yes, because he did not have so much power, and eventually was exiled to Madagascar, not necessarily because of that, but because of all the fight for independence, and he was seen as a symbol. So in short, yes, Mohammed V in the Moroccan Jewish memory, but also the larger narrative, protected the Jews, and this is how it is remembered today.
Thank you. Someone asked about the suggestion that the Jewish Agency encouraged, possibly coerced Jews to leave Morocco. Can you talk more about that?
So the Jewish Agency, I think one of their main tasks was to populate the young state with Jews from all over the world. And given that, in Morocco, there were a lot of I don't want to use terms such as Orthodox, but because that was not relevant for the Moroccan case. But there were a lot of people who were really close to religion. Let's call them I don't know, even if it's traditionalist is a good way to explain it. But people who were religious, who were close to religion, who were very conservative, and so for them, one of the main the Jewish Agency, of course, used this the notion that now we can return to Jerusalem, we can return to Zion. That had a lot of impact, and on the Jewish communities who did not, and they were promised also by the Jewish Agency, that they'll be given jobs and housing when they arrive, and so that kind of encouraged them to consider moving to Israel, without knowing necessarily, what they were, to the point that especially those who lived in rural areas. The first stop was arriving to Casablanca. When they arrived to Casablanca, they thought that they reached the Holy Land, that they were cherishing, and they were like, no, wait, we still have a whole journey before us. So yes, the Jewish Agency was pretty much involved. And also in 1961, there was a ship by the name of Egos that sank in the north of Morocco with about 40 Jews and 4 staff members who were so on this boat they were heading from Al Hoceima in the north of Morocco to Gibraltar on the way to Haifa, and the boat sank in the middle, and that kind of twisted, that created a lot of fuss and a lot of chaos. And the king was Hassan II then, who he was kind of obliged to let the Jews leave, because until then there were clandestine immigrations that happened mostly at night and in Shushu, like in secret. But then with that incident, that some argue that maybe the Mossad was involved in order to twist the arm of the king to let the Jews leave Morocco freely. And since then, numbers grew, with even like a whole family could travel with one passport, collective passport.
Interesting. Some folks were asking about salt and why this became a Jewish realm.
Why it became Jewish realm, I'm not sure, but what I know is that the area where the Mellah, the Jewish quarter, is built today, there was a salt market, and there's a mountain called the mountain Zalar that is in Fez, in the old city. The Jews, and we were talking about salt like we're talking about rock salt, right? And I think maybe it was a job that not good enough for the Muslims, or like it was perceived probably as hand job, like how do you call it, like a profession that
menial labor or something like that.
Thank you. Yeah. So that is what probably why. But also, as I said, it was very important element, very important. The salt was very important element in preserving foods and for long times. And eventually, because, you know, millah, the root is milha or melach, but milha in Arabic is salt and melach in Hebrew is salt, so quite similar. And eventually there's also another story, but this one, it's not very well researched, and I think especially Jewish historians, they disagree with this version, that the Jews used to salt the heads of some like in battles, etc. Like the Jews had the role in order for the dead bodies not to rotten. They would salt the bodies. I don't know how reliable that is, but yeah, it's still open to investigation.
Thank you. I know we don't have much time left, and probably a bunch of questions came in as I was asking you these. Donnie, if there's anything that stands out, maybe one more question, and I know a bunch of people are curious about Maimuna, so one of those two things. Donnie, did anything come in?
Yeah, there's a bunch, but we'll just pick one or two. Just have a loud dog in the background. I just wanted to ask you, Yona, I just had been through Brazil, and I know there's a really fascinating history between Jews from Morocco went looking for rubber in the Amazon forest and had started communities in Manaus and then eventually in Iquitos. I was just, a really quick question, was curious if you happen to know if that was Toshabim, Jews originally from Morocco, or Sephardic Moroccan Jews, if you knew that. And then the other question that has come in a while ago was asking about the difference between the Moroccan and the Algerian governments and why there's such different views on Israel between the two.
Oh, so for the first question, I assume that they were Sephardic Jews, because Sephardic Jews were also, probably because of the language, but maybe I'm mistaken. To be honest, it's not part of something that I researched extensively, so I don't want to say something I'm not sure about, but I only speculate that they were Sephardic Jews, because there were a lot of numbers of, especially Jews from north of Morocco, who settled in Venezuela, who were Spanish speakers, who settled in Latin America, in Venezuela, in Argentina, and in Brazil as well. So that's what I think. I'm not sure. The second question, why the Moroccan government is different from the Algerian government, I'll share with you an anecdote. When I meet with the Arabs, well, not the Arab Israelis, but mostly the Arabs of the West Bank, and I tell them that I'm from Morocco, well, I try to speak with them in Arabic, right, with the local Arabic, but of course I have a strong North African accent when I try to speak Palestinian Arabic. And so they smell that I'm not a local, right? So they tell me, where are you from? And so I would say from Morocco, and I get various reactions. Most people though, even though they show that, oh, nice, lovely, blah, 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 one person told me, don't take it personal, but we prefer the Algerians. I said, okay, interesting. Why? He said, because we relate more with the Algerians. We relate with them because they were under French protectorate for a long time. Their fight for independence, they lost 1 million martyrs. So there is kind of that link that also Algeria fosters in Algeria with the Algerians, that, that they chose first and foremost the Palestinian cause. And I think that's what brings them even more together, that cause of fighting for independence and their vision of colonialism. So they say even Algeria was for 130 years under colonial powers, they still gained their independence. And I think that what gives hope to West Bank Palestinians. Now that is of course it's controversial, it's open to discussion, but I think Morocco takes a different stand. Morocco, the king of Morocco, he has the status of, he's the head of the Al-Quds committee, right? Meaning in Jerusalem, that even when I went to Jerusalem and people know him, that because they send money to support Al-Quds, how do you say it? The mount, the Temple Mount, basically. But Morocco also tries to be reasonable and to be pragmatic. And for Morocco, there is a very important, very important and critical issue that is the Moroccan Sahara, the southern part of Morocco, that when the US recognized that it's the full sovereignty of Morocco over the Sahara, Israel did the same, and I think that's what led into reestablishing relations between Israel and France. So that kind of geopolitical interest that both countries share, that probably Algeria does not want to be involved in, because Algeria is positioned more as on the other side of Morocco, like they actually support the enemies, let's say, of Morocco. I'm sorry, I'm just saying this like really in a vulgar way, like a very, but just for the sake of time. But of course, this is a whole topic on its own.